Hey, 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 post tenebras lux, after darkness light. How did you guys like the new intro? Hopefully that went off without a hitch. First time trying that. Good to see everyone. Hey, Talitha Kumi, Lamont, Riaz, Fish for Fun, Timothy Call, Diego Navarrete. Good to see you all here. Hey, Lenny. Hey, Reasoned Answers. Hey, Assyrian Soldier. Jeremy Wong. Good to see everyone here. Very dramatic. Yeah, so actually, Riaz, I sent it to a friend. Actually, I sent it to my daughter who lives out of state and to a friend, and they both said it was too loud originally. So hopefully it wasn't too loud. I don't know. I mean, on my end, it sounded fine, but everybody that was hearing it said it was pretty loud. So just know that you got the toned down version of that. Originally, apparently it was blowing out people's eardrums. All right. Well, somebody asked me the other day if I was going to do 10 minutes worth Tertullian, because I didn't do it last time. And lamentably, I'm not going to do it this time either. I do plan to resume that. Some of you know that is something I'm currently going back through. But some of the different things that I have to do, some of the pressing things that I have to do have sort of interrupted that reading. And I've had to kind of give my attention to some other issues. I'm actually going out of town tomorrow morning to preach out of state. Morning and evening, so that has sort of that's been one source of distraction. That doesn't mean I haven't been reading. I certainly have, but just not in Tertullian. I'm actually preaching this Sunday in the morning on John 1:15 through 17, on the fullness of Christ, and then on John 1:18, the exclusivity of Christ. So if you want to hear those sermons, make sure to come to the church I'll be preaching at. Otherwise, you're going to miss out. No, seriously, though, if you live in the North Carolina area, just let me know and I'll tell you where I'm going to be preaching. I doubt I have too many viewers that are going to be in that area. But and by the way, speaking of not having too many viewers at this point, for that reason, I haven't appointed a lot of moderators. In fact, I only have one. Carm, and I don't even know if she's here, by the way. And I also haven't stipulated really any rules for the chat. I do have one obvious rule that I think should go without saying, which is no blasphemy of the blessed persons of the Trinity is permitted. That should go without saying. In fact, anyone who blasphemes the blessed name gets to go bye-bye.
Bye-bye, ya habibi, bye-bye.
That, by the way, is Abu Musab Wajdi Akari, one of my favorite Muslims, if I can admit having one. He's my favorite, not so much because I think Islam is true, but because I think he is at least more honest about what Islam actually teaches. And I was going to play for you a clip. It's killing me. I was going to play a clip for you because I think that he is the Sam Shamoun of Islam. So if you wanted to know what Sam would be like as a Muslim, all you have to do is look at Abu Musab Wajdi Akari. I've got this great clip. I don't recall if I sent it to Sam or not, but I've been laughing about it ever since I saw it. So at some point, I'm going to play that clip for you so you can all go tell Sam that you saw it. But the problem I was having when I was recording it, for whatever reason, it wasn't picking up the sound on that particular audio. I actually had to get a new version of Jaxta, which is what I use to download videos from YouTube. David actually got it for me years ago, and I guess there's a updated version that I needed. And so I got the updated version, but for whatever reason, it wasn't picking up the audio in that clip. Now, I don't know if people have the ability. I don't think this is the case. I don't know if people have the ability to prevent people from picking up the audio on certain videos, but it was definitely curious because it was only that video that I couldn't get the audio for. So whatever the case, I will find a way. Where there's a will, there's a way. I will find it, and you will all get to see Abu Musab. So the one rule is no blasphemy. If you guys see somebody blaspheming, just let me know, and I will exit the person. I will say bye-bye, Habibi, bye-bye. But as you know, I'm terrible about looking at the chat while I'm talking. It's a distraction to me, and that's just not my style. So I do try and take little pauses here and there and, field your questions or see if you're following along with me. I do hope that you are all caught up on the last episode in this Old Testament Witness to the Trinity series, because this episode is going to build off of that one. And so just as a brief recap, last time I pointed you to several texts where God is referred to in the plural. For example, I mentioned Ecclesiastes 12:1, where the Hebrew literally says, "Remember also your creators," plural, "in the days of your youth." Now, that's not translated in the plural into English. In most versions, you will find it in something like Young's literal translation, but it is plural in the Hebrew. And the Hebrew text, of course, trumps all. The Hebrew text is the inspired text. As well, in Psalm 149, verse 2, it says, "Let Israel be glad in his makers." Again, that's found in the Hebrew text. I don't know of any English version that renders it that way. I'm not even sure if it appears in Young's literal translation that way. But in any case, again, it's in the inspired, God-breathed Hebrew text of Psalm 149 too. I also pointed out Isaiah 54:5, where God is referred to as your husbands, your makers. So you actually have two plurals in that verse. In fact, it says your husbands is your makers, whose name is the Lord of hosts, and your Redeemer is the Holy One of Israel. So it makes reference to the Lord of hosts and your Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel, in a text where God is referred to in the plural. So I mentioned many passages along those lines. Those are just three of the several that I mentioned last time. Now, the reason those are of particular relevance, and I'm hoping that you're remembering them, and for that reason have also reminded you, is because the text that I want to look at today are those plural texts that are found in the book of Genesis, where God speaks as us and our, especially the lead text, Genesis 1:26, where God said, "Let us make man in our image according to our likeness." And then the verse goes on to say, so God created man. You'll note there that in Genesis 1, it uses both the word for make and the word for create. In verse 26, it says, "Let us make man." And in verse 27, it says, "So God created man." So there you have the word for make and create. Now here, they're not in the plural, but you do have God speaking in the plural. Okay, so this is not a one-off. This is the sort of thing that you find over and over again in the Hebrew text, that God is spoken of as creator in the context of creation in the plural number. Okay, so I hope everybody is on board with that. Yes, good reminder. I saw the light. Hit that like button. I don't often remind people to hit the like button. I always hope it just kind of goes without saying. If you like it, then like it, right? And if you're a Christian, then the Lord will be pleased with your like. If you're a Muslim, don't like it, Allah will not be pleased. And if you're a Satanist or an atheist, don't like it, because, well, if you're an atheist, there's no one to care. So I don't know, maybe you can like it. But in any case, hit the like button and tell your friends about these studies. I do hope they're a blessing to all of you. I hope they're edifying. I do spend a good bit of time preparing for these episodes, not as far as the background study. That all of that, as far as this issue, is stuff that I've done for decades. But preparing slides, thinking through the order in which I'm going to present things. I actually, if I have any kind of OCD hangups, it's always on the issue of the proper order in which to present things. I usually sit around mulling for hours, thinking, should I mention this first? Should I mention that first? And I'm usually thinking of what will bring about maximum clarity, maximum impact. And so I do spend a lot of time prepping. And by the way, thanks to those of you who support, I was able to get this new arm for a mic setup. And I've also been, working on acquiring some other things to make these broadcasts better and more enjoyable for you. And I hope that does make it better for all of you. All right, so I hope all of you are doing well. Talitha Kumi says she smacked it already. Thank you, Talitha Kumi. All right. By the way. Oh yeah, and thanks for reminding me again, Riaz, that I'm on Patreon. If you want to support this, if you are blessed, then feel free to support. If not, I'm happy to be a blessing to you in any case. We serve the Lord, and our reward is ultimately with Him. But I did think of showing you a couple of the recent antics of Carlos Xavier. You guys know that I started a whole series on Genesis 4:1, which has been dedicated to Carlos. Carlos was actually scoffing proudly, arrogantly at a claim I made in a recent debate. Right, in the context of the debate, the point went unchallenged, and that's for good reason. There's no basis to challenge it. But afterwards, Carlos was scoffing the idea, so I started a whole series where I was responding to it. I pointed out that in Genesis 4:1, the literal Hebrew says that Eve, in reference to the birth of Cain, responded as though she believed this was the fulfillment of that messianic promise found in Genesis 3:15. She literally says, according to the Hebrew, I have acquired a man, the Lord. However, many modern translations don't render it that way. But I pointed out, or at least started to point out, that most commentators recognize that, in fact, is the literal reading of the Hebrew text. Well, Carlos was already apparently so embarrassed by that he has completely dropped that and started going after some other notions, and has really been just further embarrassing himself. In fact, I'll show it to you the next episode I do on Genesis 4:1. But he went on a Unitarian Facebook group and he was asking questions about Greek. Now, the reason this is funny is because Carlos pretends to know Greek. He frequently tries to quote the Greek as a response to Trinitarian arguments. And as I've pointed out to him repeatedly, I pointed it out to him in our debate, which was his last debate, as I remind you, that was a year ago. I pointed out to him in the debate that he doesn't know Greek. My last debate with Solomon Jah Rodriguez, he asked a question which assumed a false understanding of Greek, and he was still carrying on after the debate. And recently he asked a question that any first semester Greek student would have known the answer to. It was so basic. I thought, my goodness, I mean, and to me, it doesn't matter if a person doesn't know Greek, right? I don't cast aspersions on anyone for not knowing Greek. I think a person can know the truth of God without knowing Greek. We're not Muslims. We don't think you have to speak some particular language, right? And, but I do think if somebody's going to pretend to know Greek, then they should know Greek, right? You shouldn't pretend to know what you don't. And you shouldn't pontificate about Greek if you don't know it. And especially if you're going to challenge the Orthodox faith of the church for the last 2,000 years, and if you're familiar with Judaism, even before that, if you look into Second Temple Jewish literature, you see this belief was even in the air prior to and during the time of our Lord. if you're going to challenge that, then you better be sure that you ought to have at least scholars who do know the language behind your position. Otherwise, you run the risk of being thoroughly humiliated. Well, in any case, Carlos is it's funny. Carlos, as well as his father-in-law, it's like every episode, if you watch, and by the way, I'm one of their few viewers, apparently. I don't have a very busy channel, so I'm not putting them down or anything. I haven't been doing much on this channel. I get about 1,000 views per video. But they've been around on their channel for years, and they still only get about 300 views. I'm one of their dedicated viewers. And but every episode, they're always going to quote the Shema, right? Because they think it's a Unitarian proof text. And they always have to remind you that they're using the modern Greek pronunciation, right? Now, I have no bones over whether you use the Erasmian pronunciation or you use the modern Greek pronunciation. It makes no difference to me, right? That doesn't in any way improve or lessen the value of your understanding of Greek grammar, Greek syntax, or how to do proper hermeneutics. But every time they say something in Greek, they always say, I'm using the modern Greek pronunciation. It gets nauseating. Every time they mention the Lord's covenant name, they always say, some say Jehovah, some say Yahweh. It makes no matter, no difference. You can say it any way you please. I mean, there's just all these repetitious things that they say. And I just think, if you've heard one thing, you've heard it all. In any case, dedicated follower of Carlos. He might want to make a clip of that, by the way. He might want to, I don't know, maybe he'll decide. He likes to make these little snippets of what I say. So maybe he'll use that as a clip. If he wants to make a fancy intro like I did with my meager skills, and by the way, I didn't see if you guys liked my intro or not, but if he wants to make an intro, he should, if I were him, I would take a clip of me saying I'm a dedicated watcher of Carlos Xavier. That's what I would do. Well, all right. Enough talk about the Unitarian herd. Let's look at the Old Testament. Let's look at the Old Testament. And Talitha Kumi says it's all Greek to me. That's okay. Well, hopefully it's all Hebrew to you here in just a minute, because we're going to be looking at the Old Testament now. So again, remember, I pointed to several passages where God is spoken of in the plural as our creators and our makers. Okay, that is already significant when we look at a text like Genesis 1:26. In Genesis 1:26, just to pull the passage up, you have the well-known text where it says, "Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness." Okay, now that first word in Hebrew, let us make, is na'asa, and it's a first-person common plural form of the verb asa, which means to do or to make. And as a plural, then it literally means let us make. Okay, the same thing is true when it comes to the noun betzelmenu, which is a first-person common plural form of the verb selam, and that word means image, right? The word selam means image, and it's preceded by what is known as a bet preposition, right? Whenever you have a bet at the beginning of a word that doesn't, when you have a bet before a word like this, bet selam, it is the preposition meaning in. So for example, when Genesis 1:1 begins, Bereshit bara Elohim, right? Bereshit is, you have the bet preposition. That's where you get the word in, joined with the word rosh, which is the word for beginning, right? Like Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah means the head of the year, the new year. And so Bereshit means in the beginning. So when God says here, in our image, it's a plural form of that with the bet preposition preceding it. And it literally means in our image. So here is a special instance of plurals, at least in the sense that it does carry over into the English text. Just why English translators do not render other examples of divine plurals into the English text is a matter of a whole different discussion. But again, remember, the Hebrew text is what's inspired. The Hebrew text is what was God-breathed. And so whether or not the translators render it that way is quite aside from insignificant as far as the question of the truth goes. But the text here in Genesis 1:26 not only says in our image, or let us make man in our image, but also according to, oops, wrong slide, according to our likeness, which is kidmutenu, right? A singular form of demut, which means likeness. And here again, you have a preposition preceding it, joined to the word. It's a word that means according to. So that's where you get the according to in the verse. It also has the embedded personal subject nu at the end, which is plural, meaning our. So it literally means according to our likeness. Now, if you've been around at all for any bit of time, you know that there are a couple of famous canards that people will raise here in an attempt to circumvent the divine import, the Trinitarian import of this plural language. This one is popular among Unitarians as well as Islamic or Muslim Unitarians. And I'll say something about Muslims here in a moment if I recall. Or if I remember, but you're familiar with the fact that people will often say this is just a royal we or a plural of majesty, such as Queen Victoria, who quipped, "We are not amused." So many people will say that's all that's going on here. God, of course, is the majesty of all majesties. So if an earthly potentate speaks in the plural when that person really isn't a plurality of subjects, then all the more can God speak in the plural number. Now, let me just take a step back here before even looking at the grammar and point out a devastating incongruity here. Now, I actually pointed this out to David Wood a long time ago, and he went and made a video on it. If I had recalled, I would have maybe I'll put it in the description box at the end. But one of the things I pointed out is if you take a step back and think through the implications of Unitarianism, well, then it should be obvious to you that if God is absolutely one, right, and there is no plurality in him in any sense, right? In other words, he's not just the only being who is God to the exclusion of other beings, but within himself, there is no diversity of persons. Well, then it's a strange idea to think that the best way to bespeak majesty is by using the plural number. Okay, I quite grant that the notion of plurality betokens fullness, majesty, glory, and so forth. But then that seems to presuppose that for somebody to be truly majestic, then he couldn't be exclusively one, not in the sense that Unitarians are talking about, right? He would have to have some kind of fullness in his being that corresponded to this language. Otherwise, it makes no sense for such a being to employ this language in order to, indicate his majesty. So I just find linguistically, philosophically, the whole notion of a plural of majesty being used for a being who is absolutely one, right? Not a plurality of persons. I find the whole notion to be incongruous. I don't think that's consistent in any stretch of the imagination. If Allah is absolutely one and he is majestic, then it should be singular terms that would speak of majesty, right? And it should be singular terms that bespeak majesty in the case of any Unitarian conception of God, not just the Islamic conception. But in any case, this canard is very popular And the fact of the matter is it has no basis in the Hebrew text, especially when it comes to verbs. Okay, remember, I already pointed out that the word "let us make," which is in the plural, is a verb. And in Hebrew, there's no such thing as a plural of majesty with respect to verbs. Okay, and this is pointed out by a whole host of scholars. I'm not now talking about other terms that might be in the plural. We could talk about those other terms. We could talk about plural nouns like Elohim or Adonim or Adonai. We could talk about other plural terms like that, and whether or not one could use something like a plural of majesty to account for that. But when it comes to verbs, Hebrew scholars are agreed across the board there is no such thing as a plural of majesty in Hebrew. Here's a handful of scholars that point that out to you. Here is Klaus Westermann in his commentary on Genesis, and he says, the plural of majesty does not occur in Hebrew. He's referring to 126. So this older explanation has been completely abandoned today. Notice he says completely abandoned. There is no scholar on the planet, according to Klaus Westermann, who would say, with respect to the plural employed in Genesis 1:26, let us make, that is a plural of majesty. That notion has been completely abandoned. It had its day. It was popular. It was making the rounds, but scholarship has completely debunked it. Here's another scholar. This is from Gerhard Heiser. This comes from an article in the Andrews University Seminary Studies. He says, there are no certain examples of plurals of majesty with either verbs or pronouns. The verb used in Genesis 1:26, asa, that's the verb. I pointed out it's plural in form in 1:26. He says, is never used with a plural of majesty. There is no linguistic or grammatical basis upon which the us can be considered to be a plural of majesty. No linguistic basis, right? So it's been completely abandoned today. There is no linguistic basis for saying that plural verbs are to be explained or can be explained in terms of the royal we, the plural of majesty. Here's another scholar, Taylor Lewis. You'll recall him. I quoted him before on Genesis 4:1 in my last episode. But he says, and this is in his commentary. Actually, it's interesting. This is in the commentary of John Peter Lang, which is kind of a 2-for-1. The upper portion of the commentary is Lang's commentary, but then beneath it you have Taylor Lewis's commentary. And I mention that because just the other day I was reading a scholar who attributed something to John Lang that was actually stated by Taylor Lewis. Apparently the person didn't read the introduction to the commentary where it explains the upper part above the line is the commentary by Lang. The lower portion is by Lewis. In any case, Taylor Lewis says, of all these views, that is the multiplicity of views that people have come up with, of all these views, the pluralis majestaticus, that is plural of majesty, has the least support. It is foreign to the usus loquendi of the earliest language. It is degrading instead of honoring to deity. And by the way, he doesn't spell out what he means here, but this is where I first got the idea that it's philosophically incongruous to say that God speaks in the plural in order to indicate his majesty. If Allah or God is absolutely one, well then singular terms should bespeak his majesty, not plural terms, right? But Lewis doesn't spell it out. But I started thinking through what Lewis was talking about, and this notion occurred to me. So I think that's a good guess at what he was talking about. But in any case, I think it's true. I think that's a legitimate observation on my part. But he goes on to say that Ibn Ezra, who was a famous Jewish scholar from the medieval period, he says Ibn Ezra shows that the few seeming examples brought from the Hebrew scriptures, such as Numbers 12:6, Daniel 2:36, do not bear it out. The latter, moreover, being an Aramaic mode of speech, right? So in other words, neither one of these passages are actually properly understood as plurals of majesty. And moreover, the latter passage is not even Hebrew, it's Aramaic. So it's not really relevant to the earlier Hebrew employed by Moses. But he goes on to say, if we depart at all from the patristic understanding of an allusion to a plurality of ideas in the deity, meaning the Trinity, the next best is that of Maimonides. Now, I won't go into the interpretation of Maimonides. Almost nobody holds that today. But what Lewis is saying is, it's not a plural of majesty. The best interpretation is the patristic interpretation. And if you don't know the patristic interpretation, the fact is that the early Christians from day one unanimously interpreted this as a reference to the persons of the Trinity. I have in an article on Answering Islam upwards of 20 different fathers, and I think 30 different quotes from those fathers showing this is how the fathers interpreted it. It was unanimous. There was not a single father who interpreted this differently. Now that, of course, doesn't ground the basis for which we ought to believe it is a reference to the Trinity, but the same grounds they had and the same clarity of sight that they had is also available to us, right? We are not lone rangers in this. We do build on the insights of those who came before us, and the fathers were recognizing the truth. And I'm going to spell it out further, but part of the way of spelling that out is to show that these alternative explanations, for all of their once popular appeal, are not at all viable. The plural of majesty has no credibility in the Hebrew language, right? It is thoroughly rejected by scholars. So I quoted Taylor Lewis, right? Here's Emil Rodiger. Okay, Emil Rodiger is the guy who updated Gesenius's lexicon. Gesenius was the father of all Hebrew lexicons. His is perhaps the best known lexicon. Emil Rodiger was the one who updated it, and in an updated portion of that, which is often quoted and attributed to Gesenius, but more accurately was contributed by Rodiger, he says Jewish grammarians call such plurals plural virium or virtutum. Later grammarians call them plural excellentiae, magnitudinous, or pluralis majestaticus. This last may have been suggested by the we used by kings when speaking of themselves, and he gives some late examples of that are suggested by people. But then he goes on, and the plural used by God in Genesis 1:26 and 11:7, Isaiah 6:8, has been incorrectly explained in this way. The use of the plural as a form of respectful address is quite foreign to Hebrew. Okay, so again, scholarship is unanimous here. But now let me show you something that isn't often done by people. I want to show you how this phrase is used throughout the Old Testament. Okay, here's how this phrase is used. This is Exodus 19:8. Now, if I'm not mistaken, it's been a while since I put some of this down in writing, but I think what I have here, and I'm going to show you, is every single occurrence of this phrase in the Torah. Okay, so this is Exodus 19:8. Notice what it says. All the people answered together. Notice it says together, so it's talking about a plurality of people. All the people answered together and said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. Right? That's the verb asa, to do or to make. Here, a plurality of people say, we will do. That's the same phrase that God employs in Genesis 1:26. It's in the cohortative there, right? Meaning God says, let us make there. It's cohortative. But here, they're using the same expression to say they will do what God has enjoined upon them. So obviously, this is not a plural of majesty here in Exodus 19:8. Here again, Exodus 24:3. Then Moses came and recounted to the people all the words of the Lord and all the ordinances, and all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words which the Lord has spoken, we will do. Na'asa, right? So again, the same phrase, the same word is used, and it's referring to a plurality of people. It's not a plural of majesty. Here again, Exodus 24:7. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people, and they said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do, na'aseh, and we will be obedient. Okay, again, the same expression, a plurality of subjects, not a plural of majesty. Numbers 32:31, the sons of Gad and the sons of Reuben answered, note sons in the plural, twice over, the sons of Gad, the sons of Reuben, saying, as the Lord has said to your servants in the plural, so we will do. I hope you're starting to see the pattern here. Okay, this expression is used repeatedly in the plural. It very clearly refers to a plurality of personal subjects. And by the way, I'm going to point out something here that's going to be relevant later, but I want you to hear it now so that we don't have to go back to these passages, or at least so that you'll know what I'm referring back to. Notice that what the people are saying here in the plural is something that all of them are going to do. Okay, they're not just saying that all of them are going to do it by means of one person. Okay, they're not saying one person is going to do this and all of us are just going to be spectators. Okay, I'll come back to that. You're going to see why this is relevant. And hopefully, even before I refer to this, you'll know why as I go along here and I bring up the next objection, the next attempt to deal with these plurals in Genesis. I hope you already think back to this and make the connection. Okay, I'll make it in any case, but notice, okay, I already showed you that. What about, notice as well, Genesis 3:22, okay? In Genesis 3:22, it says, then the Lord God said, behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil, right? Knowing good and evil. Now, here, the reason this has a special relevance is because even if it were the case that there is such a thing as a plural of majesty in Hebrew, and I've shown that there isn't, right? Not only does that not occur in Hebrew according to scholars, not only is that specific expression never used that way according to all the uses in the Torah, but even if it were the case that there is such a thing as a plural of majesty, such that a person could try and give arguments that we should understand Genesis 1:26 in that way. And by the way, normally people don't give any arguments for that. They just say it's the plural of majesty. Well, even if there were a plural of majesty, that wouldn't mean that's how we're to understand Genesis 1:26. It would just mean that's an option. But then you still have to give positive arguments for understanding it in that way. But my point here is, if there were such a thing as a plural of majesty, that can't be what's going on in Genesis 3:22, because in Genesis 3:22, it doesn't say man has become like us. It says man has become like one of us. It's partitive in the Hebrew. It's talking about a plurality of which the speaker is one of that plurality, right? Man has become like one of us, right? And remember, I already pointed out elsewhere in the Old Testament, God speaks or is spoken of as creators and makers in the plural. So, there's no reticence on the part of biblical authors to use this kind of language. You'd expect if they were Unitarians, they'd avoid this. Certainly, you can be sure that every Unitarian stumbles over these verses and thinks, I wish God didn't put these verses here. Why are these verses here? In fact, I can tell you of a certainty that these verses irk Unitarians, and those are the questions that come in their mind, because you even have an ancient Jewish tradition where they put certain words into the mouth of Moses, right? Into the mouth of Moses, the Jews put this dialogue with God, where Moses says, when he gets to the part when he's writing Genesis 1:26, he says, "Master of the universe, why do you give an excuse here to the heretics, the Menim, and say, let us make." And then God says to Moses, "You write, and whoever wants to err, let him err," right? So Jews are expressing through the mouth of Moses their own, disquiet over this. They're saying, why is this here? This gives some excuse to the heretics, right? But then they put this makeshift excuse into the mouth of Moses. All right, so Genesis 3:22 is another problematic verse for this. Okay, I already showed you those verses. There's Genesis 3:22. Now notice as well that this is really a plural. I put this up more for your later use. Maybe you're going to want to go back and look at this, the breakdown. But it's a word that means like one of us. It has the preposition kaf, the same preposition that was found before when it says, let us make man in or according to our, or in our likeness, or in, excuse me, let us make man in our image according to our likeness, right? So you have the kaf, the according to or like, at the beginning of the word. Then you have the word echad for one, and then you have the preposition mimenu, which means from or of us, right? So it literally means like one of us. But notice this, okay? Moving along, right? In Genesis 11, 1 through 4, I'm not going to read this. I think I have a slide here to go back to this, but the context is the tower builders. They're banding together. They're opposing God's command to increase and multiply, spread out, right, and subdue the earth. Instead, they're huddling together. They're trying to make a name for themselves rather than glorify God and all the earth. And because of that, God comes down in judgment. And we read about that starting in verse, well, I'll just read verse 7. God says, come, let us go down, and there confuse their language so that they will not be able to understand one another's speech. Now, this is, I bring this up for obvious reasons. It's another example of a plural. But notice this. In the context, the tower builders themselves use plurality language, right? In Genesis 11:3, they say, come, let us make bricks, right? In Genesis 11:4, they say, come, let us build. So when God responds to this by saying, come, let us go down, right? It's very clear that he's responding to the words of the tower builders. And just like the tower builders, it's not one person speaking in the plural saying, let me make bricks, let me build a tower. It's really, truly several persons, a whole group of people, all the nations at that time. Really, they're not separate nations. So all the peoples that would form the eventually scattered nations are here all together, speaking together, saying, let us make bricks, let us build a tower. So God responds, let us go down. If this is a plural of majesty, then consistency would require that the former examples of the people saying, let us, would also be plurals of majesty. But alas, they aren't. But by the way, the same expression is used several times in Genesis, as well as other places in the Old Testament, the Tanakh. In Genesis 43:4, it says, if you send our brother with us, we will go down and buy you food. It's the same Hebrew expression. 1 Samuel 14:36, then Saul said, let us go down after the Philistines by night and take spoil among them until the morning, right? So over and over again, this expression is always used to communicate a plurality of persons. Isaiah 6:8, another example of God speaking in the plural. God said, this is the context of Isaiah's call. He said, then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send and who will go for us? Then I said, here am I, send me. Now I have two other slides here real quick, and then I'm going to turn to the second objection. I think I've thoroughly beat this one to death, but I think these are about Isaiah 6:8. I could be wrong. I'm actually going to be as surprised as you are because I forgot what these two slides are. Oh yeah, I wanted to show you what it says in the pre-Christian Jewish Targums. This is the Jerusalem Targum, and here it says, the word of the Lord created man in his likeness. In the likeness of the presence of the Lord he created him. The male and his yoke fellow, he created them. And then again, in the fragmentary Targum, it says, the word of the Lord said, let us create the Son of Man in an image like us, and let them have dominion over all creatures. And the word of the Lord created Adam in his own image, in the image from before the Lord, he created him. So here you have an ancient Jewish understanding of these plurals, that it involves, at the very least, God's word as a personal subject speaking to and about other persons. So the word is one of the persons who is involved in this plurality language. And notice very clearly the word is being distinguished from someone else being referred to as Lord. He creates him in the likeness of himself as well as in the likeness of the presence of the Lord. So the Jewish Targumim were already reflecting on these plurality terms in the Old Testament and seeing it in a way that would ultimately find its great expression in the Word made flesh, the Lord Jesus, and the teaching of his apostles. Okay, so I did not create slides for this next one. I'll get into that. Actually, let me take a break here and look at your comments since I haven't been paying attention. So if you want to get something in, now is the time to get it in. And by the way, do we have any, I don't know if Carm is here. Is my moderator here? My sole moderator? All right, I don't see Carm. I don't see anyone comment. I know there's a 10-second lag, so all right, so if you have any questions on the plural of majesty, now is the time to get it in. All right, so if you had to guess, what would you say is the second most popular interpretation of these plurals as a way of getting around the plurals as a reference to the Trinity? Yeah, Truth Defender says he's hungry. If you don't know Truth Defenders, he's always hungry. Okay, let's see. Hey, Brother Brian, good to see you. Good to see you. Okay, Thought Decoder wins the prize. I don't have a prize, but Thought Decoder says the second most popular attempt to deal with this is to say that God was speaking to the angels. Okay. That is the second most popular view. What's the problem with this? Well, the problem with this, there's multiple problems with this. And in case you can't tell, it is hot down here in my basement. I think maybe I need to get one of those things that they use on actors so that they don't have a glare on their face. So Jeremy, I think Jeremy is saying something here. Let me scroll back. Okay, so Jeremy 15:6 says, what about plurals of deliberation? Well, okay, so here, a number of things could be said. I'll be very quick about this because it's not a very popular view. Usually, if you debunk the reigning view, the other views, it should be understood that the other ones would fall even easier. If one view is more popular, I mean, it doesn't always mean that it has a greater potential case for it, but it usually suggests that there at least is more going for it, so that if you refute it, then the other ones that are of lesser appeal will also fall by the wayside. But notice that Genesis 3:22, for example, is not a plural of deliberation, right? Even if you wanted to say that's what's happening in Genesis 1:26, what do you do when God speaks again in the plural in Genesis 3:22? In Genesis 3:22, God's not deliberating. He says, behold, the man has now become like one of us. There's no deliberation there. It's not God saying, okay, what shall I do? He's not taking counsel with himself. He's making a statement of fact. The man has now become like one of us. So that is one quick and easy refutation of a plural of deliberation. Okay, but now let me deal with the idea of angels. Okay, so Thought Decoder has already anticipated my first response to this. Okay, this is my first response to this. The first response is obvious. should be obvious to all of us. Thought decoder hit the nail on the head. When God says, let us make, okay, the ones that he is speaking to are those he is exhorting. This is cohortative in Hebrew. Let us do something. Those he is speaking to are being exhorted to engage in the work of creating and making man. Okay, so those who say this involves angels, those who say this involves angels necessarily then render or turn the biblical faith into a belief in more than one creator, in a sense that, really would be polytheistic, right? This is striking, I think, because, Christians are often charged with being polytheists because we believe there are three persons in the Godhead, right? Now, we reject the charge because we say these persons are not external to the Godhead. We're not talking about three separable beings in addition to each other. We're not saying there's a God named the Father, another God named the Son, another God named the Spirit, right? We're not saying there's another God besides the Father. What we're saying is that within the one God, there is a plurality of persons, right? To the exclusion of all other beings, right? This one being is a plurality of persons. So the Trinitarian is speaking consistently when he says there's only one God, and that God can be referred to as creators because that one God is a plurality of persons. But when a Unitarian comes along and implicates angels into this verse and then makes angels our creators, they really do become the polytheists they accuse us of being, because now they say that man has a plurality of creators, not simply one being who is a plurality of persons, but multiple beings, multiple creators. Right? Now, one of the problems with this, among a whole host of others, not only does God say that he's the only creator in passages like Isaiah 44, right, which doesn't preclude the Trinity, because again, we're not talking about a plurality of beings in addition to each other, but the one triune creator making all things alone by himself, right? But one of the problems with that is that the reason we are obligated to obey God, to render unto him our ultimate obedience, right? The reason we are to place our faith in him and obey him above all others is because he is our creator. Right? It is because God is our creator. That's what grounds our obligation, our duty to him, our worship to him. So if angels were involved in that work, then the same rationale would follow. We would owe to the angels as our creators, as veritable gods, our obedience and worship, our ultimate obedience. And scripture everywhere denounces this. Okay, so it's incredible to me that the very people who would accuse Christians of being tritheists or polytheists are themselves guilty of employing an argument that entails polytheism. Okay, now, how do you think some of those who employ this argument will try and get around that? Okay, here's how they'll try and get around that. This is the argument that is made, for example, by Michael Heiser. Now, interestingly, Heiser is actually a Trinitarian. Okay, so I'm not saying Heiser is an unorthodox individual. However, Heiser is, in my opinion, guilty of, he has come across something that he believes is a key that has been missing. The Christian church hasn't known anything about it, and he has restored this to the church, which is necessary to unlock the Bible, right? He has discovered a key that unlocks the Bible, right? So there are all these passages that the church has misunderstood, but he's got the key, folks. And the key is to recognize that the Old Testament teaches a notion called the divine counsel. Okay, now I'm not going to get into all of that. I'm not saying there's nothing to observe there. However, I don't think, as far as any truth that he says along the lines of a divine counsel, we're already recognized by Christians, have been recognized by Christians for ages, right? If you look at people like Athanasius, for example, when he talks about the triumph of Christ, he talks about Christ triumphing over the angels who were placed over various nations, angelic powers that had fallen, that were guilty of leading the people into false religion, and so on and so forth. These notions are not new. I'm saying to the extent that what Heiser says is true, they were already understood by Christians. To the extent that Heiser is saying anything new, it often ends up being patently wrong. Okay, and but what he does with this notion of a divine council, where he says there's a plurality of sons of God, heavenly sons of God, greater than even angels, by the way, in his theology. He often speaks, he goes back and forth between calling them the sons of God as a separate group, or angels, when but he says the angels are really a lower order of being than the sons of God. But there are 70 of them, according to Heiser. So when God speaks in the plural here, he's actually speaking to that divine council. But what Heiser says, and what other, now when I say Heiser says this, and Heiser's a Unitarian, it's ordinarily employed by Unitarians, right? So Heiser's not a Unitarian, but certainly this position is favored by or favorable to Unitarianism. And so often you'll find Unitarians appealing to somebody like Heiser. But here's what Heiser says, and what Unitarians following the reasoning of Heiser will also say to get around the charge of polytheism. They will say, when God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, he was using an expression that addresses them, but does not necessarily mean that they were to engage in the work. It was rather something that God alone was going to do, but he was announcing it to them. Okay. Now, yeah, right, Brother Brian. Heiser is a Trinitarian. I pointed that out. Heiser is a Trinitarian. However, he departs from the historic understanding of Genesis 1:26 by importing a what he considers a key, that he believes unlocks all these texts of Scripture that otherwise have been interpreted differently. I'm saying I don't agree with Heiser's application of the divine council theory to Genesis 1:26. Here's why. Heiser says that when God said, let us make man in our image, although it literally means let us make, that is all of us, let us make man in our image, he's not really calling upon them to do anything. He's telling them what he's going to do, and he's involving them in at least being informed in what he's about to do. And he tries to give an illustration that justifies this, okay? Well, first of all, he says this. This is incredible to me. This is incredible to me. He first of all says, it's reading New Testament teaching into the Old Testament to say this is the Trinity. Now, why is this incredible? Okay. It's reading New Testament teaching into the Old Testament. Well, in the first place, even if that were the case, even if it were the case that we didn't have the build or the necessary tools for giving a full understanding of this, how is that a refutation of the Trinitarian interpretation? Who doesn't believe that the New Testament sheds light on the Old Testament? Right? Now, I believe that the Old Testament contains sufficient light to arrive at a doctrine of the Trinity. But even if it didn't, right, even if it left that revelation to the New Testament, to the coming of Christ and the outpouring of the Spirit, even if that was the case, how is that a problem? Didn't Jesus bring other truths to greater light in the New Testament? Doesn't the New Testament say that Jesus brought life and immortality to light through the gospel? Didn't Jesus shed light on a whole host of things? Isn't Jesus, in fact, the fulfillment of Old Testament shadows? Isn't he that light in terms of which we see light, right? Isn't he the light in terms of which we see the truth in those shadows for what they are? Right now, I'm not saying we don't see in those shadows themselves the truth. What I'm saying is we get a greater fullness in the New Testament. And for anybody who accepts the New Testament witness to reject its relevance for interpreting the Old just because it's a New Testament truth, it just strikes me as patently unchristian. This is not a Christian approach to things on any approach, right? Even if you don't believe the Trinity is revealed in the Old Testament. But here's why I think it's so incredible for Heiser to say this. Heiser says this is a New Testament idea. To read it back into the Old Testament is anachronistic, right? But here's the problem. If you read Heiser, Heiser himself points out that the Old Testament teaches a distinction of persons, right? He talks about how the Jews themselves recognize this in the Old Testament. Heiser himself talks about the angel of the Lord being a second divine person. He even tries to tie it in with A&E culture, where you had God and his vice-regent, or El and his vice-regent Baal. And he says that these two divine gods in the ancient Near East are effectively being displaced by Yahweh, right? The Jews are saying, no, El and Baal are not the true God. Rather, it's Yahweh and his son, Yahweh and the angel of the Lord. He also points out very clearly passages where the word is treated as a divine hypostasis, a divine person, right? Heiser points this out. So why does Heiser say it's anachronistic to read New Testament notions back into this verse when he himself admits this is part of the Old Testament revelation, and even the Jews recognize this, okay? So his first reason for rejecting the Trinitarian interpretation is not only refuted by the evidence of the Old Testament itself, but it's refuted by Heiser's own better insights. That's why I find it so incredible. Heiser often really puts down other scholars, and this also bothers me to no end. He puts down other scholars at every turn, just acting like he's discovered the key that everybody else is missing, and it's almost like you got to come to him. That's the impression that you get, that I get from Heiser, right? I'm not saying none of his work is worthwhile. I'm just saying that's the impression I get from him. But the problem is he's not the paragon of consistency here. And so, when he just sort of pats other people on the head, oh, the church fathers, the church fathers, they did the best they could. But I'm a 21st century Christian. I've discovered the key, right? The key from, came down to me from heaven, and I've discovered the necessary, tool to unlock the tool shed. That kind of thing to me leads people in false directions. And in this case, it has led Heiser to think that he has discovered something that he hasn't, on the grounds of a very inconsistent form of reasoning. Okay. So that's the first thing. But here's what Heiser tries to say now in favor of taking it as God saying, let us make, when it doesn't really mean the angels are going to make, right? Heiser says, imagine the following sentence. Okay, how about if I say to my wife and children, let's get pizza for dinner, right? Let us get pizza for dinner, okay? And then I go out to the store and I get pizza, and we come back and eat it. Now, in this scenario, I said, let us get pizza, let's get pizza, but I was the only one to go and get it, okay? This is an illustration of how Heiser said the phrase is being used. Let us, right, make man, meaning only God is going to do it, but he is using that expression to include the angels, even though they're not going to actually go and do it. Now, the problem is, number one, you have no example of this in the Old Testament. He has to use a contemporary example of this. Now, even if he could find examples of that outside of the Bible in the ancient Near East, I don't recall him ever bringing forward an example, or maybe if some other scholar did, that's fine. You don't find this used that way in Scripture, right? And there's no reason to look outside of Scripture for an explanation of this, right? You already have the Old Testament repeatedly speaking of God as creators in the plural, makers in the plural, speaking of himself as us and our in the plural repeatedly, right? There's no reason to explain this away when you have a perfectly good way of accounting for it in terms of the Old Testament's teaching of a plurality of persons in the Godhead, okay? Now, if what I've said is not already enough to show that, next time we'll look at all of this more fully and show that even the context supports the Trinitarian interpretation. The context supports understanding this as a reference to God, his word, and his spirit. And his word not merely as an utterance, a bare utterance, but as an actual person. Okay, and I'll show you this from the context of Genesis 1, as well as from the rest of the Tanakh, the Old Testament. right? From the law of Moses, the prophets, and the writings. I'll show you that that's how they lead us to understand these things. Okay, so that's my initial, refutation of the two most popular views trying to counter a Trinitarian interpretation of Genesis 1:26, 3:22, 11:7, and Isaiah 6:8. It is not a plural of majesty. It is not a reference to the angels. That's established by the grammar and by the consistency of its usage throughout the Torah, throughout the Old Testament. Moreover, this is perfectly consistent with the fuller revelation of the New Testament, as well as what we're going to see next week in the Old Testament's teaching about the Word and the Spirit. But let me just say one more thing here, going back to Genesis 1:26. Okay, I want you to think about something. Genesis 1:26 says that God said, "Let us make man in our image." Okay. According to the Old Testament, man was originally made upright, but man has sought out many devices, right? Man has fallen from his original upright condition. Okay. Now we read in places of the Old Testament where it says things like, "There's not a righteous man on earth who always does what is right and never sins," right? Man is no longer upright. Man has fallen. Man is sinful. What this means necessarily is that the divine image in man, although it's still there, has been marred, right? It has been corrupted by sin. Okay. And that's why the rest of biblical revelation is dealing, among other things, with the necessity of man being restored to the divine image. Okay. Now ask yourself a question. If man is going to be restored into the divine image, okay, how could that restoration into the divine image take place? Okay. Well, in the first place, God could just wipe out the human race and start all over, making another creature in God's image, right? But if God is not going to do that, if he's going to redeem already existing man, if he's going to redeem fallen man as he currently is, if he's going to do that, how is he going to do so? Okay. Now, I would submit to you the way he could do so, the only way he could do so, is by the same one in whose image man was made, taking on himself our nature, right? Taking on himself our nature and uniting us to him, right? So that in him, that nature can be restored. In him, man can be restored to that original image in which he was made, right? Which, by the way, whose image does the New Testament say we're being restored into? Right? Into what image are we being conformed, or according to what image? Right? Whose image are we being transformed into? Into whose likeness are we being transformed into according to the New Testament? Everybody should immediately know the answer to that, right? Christ, right? Over and over again, the New Testament says we're being conformed into the image of Christ. We're being brought back into the divine likeness, the likeness of Christ. We're going to be like him. We're going to see him as he is. Romans 8, right? We're being conformed to the image of his son. Over and over and over again, Scripture says that we're being conformed into Christ's image. This is part and parcel of why the New Testament itself necessitates viewing these Old Testament passages in a Trinitarian light. And by the way, by whose energy, by whose power does this transformation take place? What member of the Godhead is active in man, restoring him to the divine image, the holiness, the righteousness, and so forth of the divine image? We're being transformed into the image of Christ. But who is that active agent who especially takes this role upon himself to transform us back into the divine likeness? Whose special operation, whose work? Right. Thought Decoder and Timothy Call got it. Right. The Spirit. The Spirit is the one. Once again, the New Testament, which some people want to say is inadmissible for interpreting the Old, but the New Testament tells us. By the way, if it's illegitimate to read the New Testament to recognize the relevance of the New Testament for interpreting the Old, what is a person saying but that the New Testament is inconsistent with the Old? If you say it's anachronistic to read these things or things in their light, aren't you saying then that these are not in continuity with it? Right? I just don't get the reasoning of people. I would grant if it wasn't the case that we could prove that the New Testament is the fulfillment of the Old, then it would be illegitimate to read it, the Old Testament, in light of it. But in light of the fact that the New Testament is the fulfillment of the Old, which we all believe as Christians. I mean, I could argue that if I were talking to a bunch of unbelievers, I could argue that. But given that fact, which Heiser recognized, Unitarians recognize, others recognize, there's nothing illicit then, once you realize the New Testament is the fulfillment of the Old, to then say this provides for us a fuller light in terms of which to view the Old Testament. But again, I'm going to look next time. Next time we come back, I'm going to show you this is what the Old Testament itself says, right? This isn't just the New Testament writers making things up. The New Testament writers are only following the Old Testament when they say these sorts of things, okay? And by the way, this reminds me of something that I'll just say as an aside here. So Brother Brian, by the way, put this up. I'm going to quote this and then make my point. But Brother Brian pointed to Colossians 3, where it says, have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge after the image of its creator, Colossians 3:10. Now, in context, Paul is talking about, you got to love the language. Paul talks about putting off the old self and putting on the new self, like it's some kind of, clothing, right? You're going into your closet and you're throwing the old clothes in the hamper and you're grabbing new clothes. But in context, he's talking about Christ, right? He talks about put on the Lord Jesus Christ, right? So it's Christ's image that he's talking about there. Remarkable that people would just cast this aside, who are professing Christians, right? Whether Unitarian, I mean, I'm not as surprised when it comes to Unitarians, right? For Unitarians, casting aside the witness of the Bible is the name of the game, right? They want to pretend they're not casting it aside, but that is what they're doing, right? But for a Trinitarian to do that, to me, that's just remarkable. Anyways, I wanted to say, okay, oops. For those that don't know, I sometimes, because I can't erase a comment once it goes up screen without pressing on somebody else's comment, I often put another comment on the screen that just, is right in front of me. I don't know what it is. I can't find it on this program. I used to see it, but now it's not there to just erase the comment without putting another one up. Anyways, I was thinking about something. I'm going to put this comment up here real quick. Comment on that. But a month or two ago, I was talking to a different Unitarian, and he really surprised me by saying, he said, we were talking about Isaiah 9:6. And as you might know, you probably know, if you've talked to Jewish people will say that certain prophecies aren't even about Jesus, right? They're not messianic. They'll say, like Isaiah 9:6, they'll say is about Hezekiah. Right now, there's easy answers to that, but they'll say it's about Hezekiah, not about Jesus. Now, usually Unitarians don't take that route. They'll admit that certain passages are messianic, like Isaiah 9:6, but they'll try and reinterpret their significance, right? Isaiah 9:6 says, this is the name by which he'll be called, Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. So Unitarians will admit it's messianic, but they'll try and reinterpret the verse, right? But what surprised me is this Unitarian I was talking to, he made we were talking about Isaiah 9:6, and he said, unless the New Testament quotes a passage, then it's not messianic, right? So only those passages quoted in the New Testament are messianic. And I thought, well, that's incredible, right? Because, in the first place, it's if the New Testament writers had to duplicate everything in the Old Testament in order for us to, derive the relevance from it, Well, I mean, it'd be several times longer, right? We'd be toting a Bible that's that much bigger. But no, rather the proper approach should be to say the New Testament quotes, Daniel 9. The New Testament quotes passages that are relevant to the point they're making, the thing they want to establish at that point in their writing. And these provide exemplary cases showing us how likewise to go to the Old Testament and interpret it. Right? When Jesus in Luke 24 talked to the disciples on the road to Emmaus, it says that he interpreted them in all the scriptures, the things concerning himself. He showed them in the law of Moses, the Psalms, and the prophets, all the things that were written concerning him. Okay? Jesus treated the whole Old Testament as a messianic text. One of these days, I'm going to do a sermon, or a series, not sermons. I'm going to do a series on messianic prophecy and talk about the messianic character of the Old Testament as a whole, not just isolated verses. I'm going to show you that the whole warp and woof of the Old Testament is messianic, right? It's not just specific prophecies. The whole drift of the Old Testament, its whole shape, its canonical shape, everything about it bespeaks a divine redeemer who is to come in the future and accomplish redemption. Okay, but that's another topic for another day. But I was surprised, but here was one of the funny things about that. This is what was funny. He said Isaiah 9 is not about Jesus because it's not quoted in the New Testament. Now, I went through the reasons why that's so entirely wrong-headed, but then I pointed out what's even worse for you is apparently you don't realize Isaiah 9 is quoted in the New Testament, right? Isaiah 9 is quoted in the New Testament. In Luke chapter 1, I'll pull it up here real quick. In Luke 1, it says, this is in the song of Zechariah, when it says that Zacharias was filled with the Holy Spirit and prophesied, saying, well, in the course of that song, he echoes Isaiah 9. He speaks of the coming Messiah who's going to shine upon those who sit in darkness and the shadow of death. Now, if you look at the Greek translation of this, you recognize what he's echoing there. He's echoing Isaiah 9:2, where he talks about the people who walk in darkness will see a great light. Those who live in a dark land, the light will shine upon them. Okay, so that's, oops, what did I do? Yeah, so, oh, darn it, my computer's going crazy here. Sorry, folks. I don't know what just happened. One second. All right. And by the way, Matthew 4 also appeals to Isaiah 9. It speaks of the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan. So it's talking about why Jesus went there, right? And that's a direct quotation from Isaiah 9. So the New Testament does in fact make reference to Isaiah 9 in application to Jesus coming to that area, the light dawning, the light shining on Zebulun and Naphtali, the very thing that Isaiah says in Isaiah 9 as the lead-in to Isaiah 9:6. And by the way, Isaiah 9:7 even goes on to say that it's referring to the coming, the ultimate king that would be seated on David's throne. So anyways, I just thought that was incredible. One day I'm going to do a whole series on Messianic prophecy. All right. So how in the world, I should try and figure out how to take these comments off at some point, but I just don't know how unless I put another one up there. Okay, so Kenneth says, thank you for your teachings, Mr. Rogers. Your life and your work mean more than you know, to many more than you know. God bless you always. Thank you, Kenneth. That is a blessing to me. I enjoy edifying others. I realize, number one, that it brings glory to God, and he is the very reason for our existence is to bring him glory, right? Paul said, whatever you do, whether you eat or drink, do all to the glory of God. So that's the ultimate reason for our existence. But also, we're told that Jesus, for the joy set before him, endured the cross, endured its shame, meaning that Jesus looked ahead to the fact that his redemption would bring many sons to glory, right? And for that reason, he endured the cross. And so even though I'm certainly no one's redeemer, I'm not going to the cross, but I do likewise take joy in knowing that these teachings are instrumental in helping people themselves come to glorify God, but also move them along the road to glory, right? The very thing that Jesus set before him is also something that I think we can all set before us and motivate us to the goal, right? I mean, think about it. I mean, that's a it's a sobering passage, right? When you consider, I guess this is a practical moment, but when you consider the severity of what Jesus was going to endure on the cross, right? It wasn't just that Jesus was going to endure physical torture, right? One of the worst forms of death and torture that the world has ever devised, death by crucifixion. And if you don't understand how gruesome that is, how terrible that is, go read a description of crucifixion and what happens in the process. But for all of that, the physical torture was only one aspect of it, a necessary aspect, a important aspect. But Jesus was enduring the wrath of the Father, right? As that representative member of the Godhead, the Father was pouring out the wrath of that all three persons have towards sin. But Jesus was the one who became incarnate. He was the one who was bearing this wrath. Jesus endured the wrath of God. Why do you think Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, when he was looking forward to this, it talks about Jesus agonizing in prayer, right? It doesn't mean that Jesus was afraid. It's not talking about anything like that. But Jesus is really and truly, reflecting on what's coming upon him, right? He was a real human being, right? He was really going to endure the severity of divine wrath. And so you ask yourself, what was it that kept Jesus walking the road to the cross? What was it that kept him doing that? Okay, we know there are two reasons, right? One is to please the Father, right? He says, I delight to do your will. I always do those things that please my Father, right? Over and over again, Jesus says he's doing these things because they bring glory to the Father. Okay, that's one thing. But the other thing we're told in the book of Hebrews was, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. And the joy that was set before him was many sons being brought to glory. In fact, I also think this is the idea that you see in Isaiah 53. In Isaiah 53, notice what it says. And this is actually, this is sobering. Isaiah 53:10 says, the Lord was pleased to crush him, putting him to grief. Okay? The Lord was pleased to crush him. If he would render himself as a guilt offering, he will see his offspring and prolong his days, right? And the good pleasure of the Lord will prosper in his hands. As a result of the anguish of his soul, he will see it and be satisfied. He'll see the results of the anguish of his soul. By his knowledge, the righteous one, my servant, will justify the many, and he will bear their iniquity. Okay, so here's Isaiah basically saying the same thing. If he would render himself a guilt offering, then he will see his life prolonged, meaning after being offered up as a sin offering, he will prolong his days. He'll be resurrected, right? You can't prolong your days after being crushed and put to grief unless there's a resurrection. But it says as a result of that, he's going to see the accomplishment of his anguish. He's going to see the result of it, namely bringing many sons to justification before God. He will justify the many, right? That's why Jesus did it. And so what I'm suggesting is the same thing ought to animate us. Oops, I put yes, the end goal. Okay, yeah. The same thing ought to actuate us. It ought to impel us. It ought to move us to do what we do. And so, I work hard to do a bunch of things. I have many jobs. I serve as a pastor in prisons. I also fill pulpits for pastors on Sundays when they can't be there to preach for whatever reason. I also work for another ministry in the evening where I answer theological questions through a different service. I'm not going to mention it because I don't want Muslims going there. I already get some Muslims. I don't know how they found me there, but I don't want 1,000 Muslims coming in and disrupting the service. But and then I have a third job, a third unnamed job, and then I'm trying to do this also. So I enjoy this. I love doing this. I'm glad it edifies people. I'm glad it glorifies God. And so thank you for telling me that this was a blessing to you. I hope that you'll like this video. I hope that you'll tell other people about it. Get them to subscribe. By the way, we're on the road to this channel actually being monetized. Right now, it's not monetized because I haven't had enough views. If you look back, you'll notice that I have videos that go back several years, but those were years ago. Only a few videos, maybe 10 videos that I did over the course of I don't know how long I've had this channel, 7 or 10 years. And that's because I mostly produce videos on David's channel. Actually, when I get back from this trip when I go to preach this weekend, I'm going to come back and record a video for David that I have planned. This is a Yasser Qadi video, folks. In fact, I would show you the thumbnail for that video if I could do it in a jiffy, but I can't. It would take too much to get this transferred over into StreamYard. But yeah, I have 3,000 subscribers right now. So actually, the past several weeks, I started doing regular broadcasts. And if you look at the analytics, you'll see that the subscribers jumped a lot in the past month. The subscribers jumped a lot. The watch hours jumped a lot. So having this channel for, 7 or so years, most of that, those subscribers, there's most came from several years ago. Then there's this long pause, and then I got a really big chunk of subscribers in the last month, right? So let's keep that going. I have much more to say. I will continue this, Lord willing, next Friday. We'll talk again about the Old Testament witness to the Trinity. I may or may not do an episode on Sunday when I'm out of town at a hotel, resuming my Genesis 4:1 series. Did Eve believe that she gave birth to the Messiah and think that he was a divine person? I may do that on Sunday when I'm in the hotel. It all depends on how everything works out on Sunday. So just keep your eyes peeled for that, because I will try and I'll try and put up a preview for that to alert you in advance. With that said, sorry if you asked a question I didn't get to. So I'm just looking at the chats here real quick. Yep, so keep the ball rolling, folks. Thanks for listening. By the way, I don't know if it makes any difference on your end that I have this microphone right here. Normally, when you see people with these microphones, they have them real close. My problem is that I talk with my hands, and I already knew I was going to be whacking this thing. My wife actually, she always knows when I'm talking somewhere. If she comes up and I'm talking in a group, she'll always put her hand on my shoulder so I know she's there, because otherwise I could accidentally move my hand and hit her. She got hit a few times. So has my daughter, my older daughter, or one of my second oldest daughter. Yeah, so they know that I talk with my hands a lot. So I had to put this a little bit back. And And the reason I got this, by the way, to put this up is because I noticed when I checked back on some of the broadcasts, and every time I touched my desk, you could hear me hitting the desk, right? So I thought, okay, and then I also realized that every once in a while, I kind of hit the desk with my knee, and then you can see the video shake like right now. So I'm going to find a way to reduce the vibration factor as well. I don't want to be anal, but I know some people, I do know. I mean, David, when I first started doing videos for him, he said, quit kicking the desk, right? Quit kicking the desk. You're an amateur, right? So I am a little bit mindful of those things. I'm trying to make it viewer friendly, right? Books are natural soundproofer. Well, I wish I had books up on my ceiling because sometimes I want to be loud down here in the basement, but I can't because my wife and kids are up there. And speaking of which, it is midnight. So I will bid you all a good night. I hope this was a blessing to you again. Hope you all liked it. Hope you all liked it literally and physically by pressing that like button, and do tell others about it. Good night. God bless you all. Pray for my travels tomorrow. It's a long road tomorrow. So God bless you all. All right. God bless you all. Have a good evening.